Hello everyone. The next topic which I will be discussing here is about the joints. Now there are different types of joints which we will be discussing in this slide. But first we will so what are joints? So if I tell you to distinguish between the living organisms and non-living organisms, what is the key characteristic? The key characteristic is the living organisms can have the ability to locomote, which means they have the ability to locomote and move. So this is one of the key characteristic of the living organism which makes them different from the non-living organism. So this is a feature which is crucial for survival for living organisms, and they need to adapt their environment and cater to their own biological needs such as food, self-preservation and mating. Now, most living organisms have their own special system for locomotion and movement. So these may include rudimentary structures such as the cilia, the flagella, or more complex structures such as wings or feet. So these are some of the more complex structures. So the scientists, they have theorized that locomotion and movement has significantly contributed to man's evolutionary process. Now, so the major key factor that helps in locomotion. So why are we discussing so much about the locomotion? Because the major key factor that help in locomotion are the bones and the muscles. So these are the major factors. So in humans and other vertebrates, the bone form a framework which is called as the skeletal system that provides the shape and structure. Now coming to the joints, a joint which is known as an articulation or articular surface is a connection that occur between the bones in the skeletal system. Now there are joints that provide the means for movement. So there are joints that will provide the means for the movement. So the type and the characteristic of a given joint determines its degree and the type of movement. So joints, they are being classified based on the structure and function. So they are being classified based on the structure and the function. So the joints, they help us to rotate our shoulders, bend our knees and elbows. So by the definition, joint is a point where two bones meet to provide a framework that permits the movement. So what it does, it will provide the movement. Bones are attached to one another by tissues which is called as the ligaments. So the bones, they are attached to one another by the tissue which is called the ligaments, and muscles, they are attached to the bones which is called as the tendons. So the muscles, they are attached to the bones which is called as the tendons. Now I will be discussing about the classification of the joints. So the classification is the joints have been classified into two different types. First is the structural classification of joints and second is the functional classification of joints. So we will be discussing each of these in detail. So first I will tell about the structural classification of joints. So this has further been divided into three parts. And what are these three parts? Fibrous joints, cartilaginous joints and synovial joints. So these are the three types of joints. Now we will be discussing each of these in detail. First of all, the fibrous joints. These are the immovable joints and they are found where bones are not flexible. So where they are found where the bones are not that flexible. In joints, bones have been fused together in such a way that they are fixed to that part, mostly or commonly to create a structure. So a prominent example of a fixed joint is the skull. So this the example here is the skull, which is made up of the number of fused bones. So skull is made up of number of the fused bones. And other examples include the upper jaw, rib cage, backbone, pelvic bone, etc. So these are some of the other examples. Next is the cartilaginous joints. So they are partially movable joints which comprise of symphysis or synchronidis joints. These joints occur in those regions where the connection between the articulating bones is made up of the cartilage. Now, what is the term known as? So there is a term which I am introducing here, that is the scrontodis. So they are temporary cartilaginous joints which are present in young children and last until the end of their puberty. And the examples are being described here. So epiphyseal plates that are present at each end of the long bone is responsible for bone growth in children. So examples also include the pubic symphysis, and other include the cartilaginous types of joints, which include the spinal column and the rib cage. So the next is the synovial joints. So they are the most common type of joints, which because this joint help us to perform a wide range of motion. And what are they? They help us in walking, running, typing, and more. So synovial joints, they are flexible, movable, can slide over one another, rotatable, and so on. So these joints are found in our shoulders, joints, neck joints, knee joints, wrist joints, etc. So these are found in these areas. So next is about the functional classification of joints. Now the functional classification of joints have been further divided into these parts. Now what are these? Ball and socket joints, pivotal joints, hinge joints, gliding joints, condyloid joints, and saddle joints. So these are the types of the or classification of the joints. Now, ball and socket joints. So here one bone is hooked into a hollow space of the another bone. So this type of joint helps in the rotatory movement, and the rotatory movement is here the shoulders. So the shoulders, they can be rotated easily. So the ball and socket joints are present in the shoulder. The pivotal joints. So in this type of joint, one bone has tapped from into the other in such a way that there is a full rotation, which is not possible. So in the ball and socket joints, the rotation can be possible, but in this particular case of joint, the full rotation is not possible. This joint aid in sideways and back forth movement. So the example here is the neck. So we cannot rotate the neck fully. So the example here is the neck. Hinge joints. So they are door hinge. For example, when there is a door, what happens is you can just do this way, the rotate. So the examples here are ankles, elbow, and knee joints. So these are some of the examples of the hinge joints. Next is about the saddle joints. So there is a biaxial joint that allows the movement on two planes, flexion, extension, and abduction or adduction. So the example here will include the thumb bone in the human body, which is having the saddle joint. So it is having the saddle joint. So thumb. Condyloid joints, they are the joints with two axes which permits up and down or side to side motion. So the condyloid joints can be, where it is found, it can be found at the index finger, carpals of the wrist, elbow, and the wrist joints. So these are found in these areas. So this joint is also known as the ellipsoid joints or condylar. Now the last joint we will talk about is the gliding joint. It is also known as the plane or planar joint. What this joint does is it permits two or more rounds of flat bones to move freely together without any rubbing or crushing of the bones. So it will allow the bones to move freely. This joint is mainly found in two regions, or those regions where two bones meet and glide on one another in any of the directions. So the example of the gliding joint will include the lower leg of the ankle joint and the forearm to the wrist joint. So these are the examples of the gliding joint. This was all about the joints, the classification of joints and the types of joints. These are some of the references.